Okay. My name is Alex Barenboim, and I'm the VP of Mobility and Enterprise Solutions at AAJ. And this webinar is regarding the 5 basic things that you need to know in order to develop a really awesome mobile app, and some other background information about the differences between mobile apps and native apps, responsive apps, MDOT websites, and other things that are related to all this. At the conclusion of this presentation, you're going to know the differences between native mobile apps, responsive pages, MDOT websites, and when to consider each one. You're going to know about the differences between the different programming languages used throughout all the different mobile platforms. But we're also going to talk a little bit about the rapid mobile development platforms and how some of them have good benefits and some of them don't. The 4th item is regarding secrets of getting your submissions approved quickly by Apple and Android through their app stores. And last but not least is UX and UI design, the often overlooked aspect of application development, and why UX and UI is probably one of the things that matter the most in the application development space for mobility. So some of the things that AAJ does as far as mobility is we provide all kinds of different solutions for mobile app development and mobile app design. So we do a lot of managed services. We provide a lot of architecture and development capabilities. We do a lot of strategy and discovery. We provide UX and UI services, and we integrate your app with your, with your back-end systems. And these are the 5 general areas of mobility that we provide. And I'm not going to go through the details of all of these, but and that's actually going to be for a different webinar session. But the main stuff here is that for strategy and discovery, we tend to go through a process. We take a look at what you guys have. We take a look at what you want to do, and we figure out how to do that. We architect and develop the solution. We integrate it with your back-end systems, if you have any back-end systems. We also do some managed services where we manage your apps and manage your devices. And finally, we do the whole UX and UI stuff. So those are the basics topics that we're going to talk about today. So a lot of people ask, what are the differences between a native app regarding an MDOT app or a mobile website? What is the difference between all those? Well, one easy way to explain it is to actually show you guys some examples of what the differences are between a native app, a rapidly developed app, versus a mobile web. So let me go through the process of showing that to you through a browser. And one of the things that I'll do is show some examples of how all these things look depending on what kind of system you guys are developing. So first and foremost, let's see what a responsive website looks like. So I'm going to go to a favorite website that I have called CNN, and if I can spell it properly, that'd be helpful. And here is a website that looks fine on a desktop platform. And as you can see, it's pretty wide, and it's kind of different than a mobile device, which is more of a portrait perspective rather than a landscape perspective, which is what you're seeing here. But one of the things that I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be taking the screen and I'm going to be effectively resizing it. And I'm going to resize it to a point where it looks like it's coming from a mobile device. And as you can see right here, this is about the size of a mobile device like an iPhone or an Android. And now all of a sudden you see this icon here and this search bar here, and everything seems to have shrunk because we resized the screen to fit the same size as a mobile device. And this is what is called a responsive design. It responds to the size of the screen, and more importantly, it responds so that you can easily click on things with your finger, which is completely different from a size and interface perspective than clicking with a mouse. So if you want to see what it looks like, when you go to the desktop, here's what it looks like on the desktop. And as you can see now, all of a sudden, it looks completely different. So what we just experienced here is what's called responsive design. It's more complex to develop. There's a whole bunch of technologies out there, including HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and a whole bunch of other things to enable a software engineering firm that creates this kind of an illusion where you can see it on a browser and it looks one way, and using the same website, it displays the same exact information, but it displays it differently depending on the size of the browser. And let me show you how that happens, and it immediately snaps in and looks completely different. So this is a responsive design. Some systems like CNN, they don't have a separate website that's specifically for mobile. There are some websites out there that redirect you to a mobile version of their website, and this is what the industry calls an M.dot website. Why? Because the name of the URL is typically m.dot whatever their domain name is .com. CNN chose not to do that. They decided to have one website that does everything, and that's great, but it's a little bit more challenging from a development and support perspective. Some companies decide to split the two and have an M.dot website where it's a completely separate website, and if you reach the main website from your mobile browser, it redirects you to the mobile website version of their website. So this is what responsive design looks like, and what the differences are between a main website and an M.dot website. Now this is actually completely different than a real mobile app that runs on your phone. So let me show you, what this thing looks like, and as opposed to a real mobile app. And here is actually my cell phone that I connected to my machine, and here's what my cell phone looks like as it is right now. So as you can see, you've got different apps here, and there are some cool things that you can see with the apps, like you have this little red number 1 on there, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But looking at this this interface as opposed to looking at what it looks like on a mobile browser, and let me do that by going directly to the mobile app and typing www.cnn.com, and you should see something that looks identical to what you see on the right side of the screen. And as you can see, it looks fairly identical. So the responsive designed version of the website on the desktop looks exactly the same as it does on a mobile device. And that's how people test the process of how it will look like on a mobile device by using their desktop, is they simply resize the browser to be very minimal to emulate the size of your cell phone. Now, there are several differences, obviously, between the three main predominant mobile platforms. So there is Android, which is manufactured and developed by Google. There's the iOS platform, which is manufactured and developed by Apple. And then there's the Windows platform, which is obviously manufactured by Microsoft. Those three platforms are more than 95% of the market, with the other remaining few percentages to other devices like BlackBerry and so on that don't really amount to a big percentage. So we're going to talk about mostly the three main ones, which is Android, iOS, and Windows. So the development environments for developing apps traditionally, prior to some rapid tools that we'll talk about in a minute, have been to what's called creating a native application. A native application is simply an application that runs natively on that platform. The three different platforms, they actually do not, you can't take an iOS app and run it on Android and vice versa. For iOS, it's developed on a language called Objective-C and using a development environment made by Apple called Xcode. For Android, the apps are developed in Java and using all kinds of different tools that are freely available. And the development environment is using Eclipse or any of the other plethora of different software development environments. And for Windows, naturally it's using Microsoft's C# environment and using Visual Studio. Those are the different development environments and languages that are used for the different mobile platforms. Now, people have been wondering, is it possible to develop something so that if you need to develop an application for all three platforms, you can easily do that? So over the years, over the last 8 or 9 years or so, people have been struggling with that, and there have been a few firms out there that have popped up, some more recently than others, where you develop the application using one language, something that's common that most people are aware of and know, and then you deploy that environment to all three, potentially even more different environments. So one of such tools is by a company called Xamarin, and AAJ, which is the firm I work for, we are pretty strong partners with Xamarin. We're one of the few partners in the South Florida area that have that relationship with Xamarin. And Xamarin allows traditional .NET developers, typically writing code in C#, to develop a mobile application using C#, but for iOS, for Android, and for Windows simultaneously. And this comes to, as great news for C# developers who have never developed mobile apps. And that's one of the things that .NET shops can now do, is take their traditional web developers or back-end API developers and train them with little effort, and they are now becoming decent mobile developers. And there are some differences, and you have to have some understanding of the various hardware between Android and iOS and Windows, but for the most part, they all seem to have the same types of features and functions, like a camera, a GPS, and those kinds of things. And Xamarin creates an essential interface between the C# environment and those device-specific functionalities, so that you don't have to know exactly how to call the iOS version of the camera or the Android version of the camera or the Windows version of the camera. You just call the camera function, and it opens up the camera and you can do things with it. So it abstracts that layer of complexity away from the developer and allows you to use the Xamarin APIs, which are published, have been available for quite some time, got lots of support for it, and hundreds of thousands of developers all around the world have been using that platform. So there are many other tools like Xamarin. For example, there's a tool out there called PhoneGap. And PhoneGap is a different type of tool because it achieves the same end goal, which is basically develop a mobile app in a particular technology, but you can deploy it to all three and then some target mobile devices. So the development environment for use for PhoneGap is using HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. So you develop a website using those technologies, and there are many, many websites out there that have that. And then you basically take PhoneGap and you wrap that code that you've already written, and you wrap it inside PhoneGap, and it basically spits out a mobile app for each of those three different platforms. Again, each platform has its own specific nuances and whatnot, so there is some native needs native knowledge that you need to have, but it's very, very minimal. And those are the benefits of rapid mobile development platforms. The challenge, though, between all of them is that you still need to have understandings of the various devices. And as advanced as some of these rapid platforms are, they still don't do everything that you can do when you're doing native development. Some of the key factors that are differentiating between native development and using the rapid development environments are speed and access to some very complex capabilities of the device. So if you're doing something complex like video streaming, those kinds of things, it's very, very challenging to do them in Xamarin. It's much more beneficial to do that using native development. However, if you're not doing anything complicated and it's pretty much straightforward, like you're using a form, you're asking people to log in, you're having people select certain things from a menu, standard type stuff like that, maybe taking a picture, maybe uploading a file. Those are the kinds of things that are perfect targets for Xamarin because it easily allows you to develop very quickly for all three platforms using a single code base. So those are the benefits there. Last but not least is the topic of UI and UX design. And one of the most overlooked aspects of mobile development is how does this app look and how do people interact with it. And the challenge there is similar to a well-designed website. And I'm sure all of you have visited very crude-looking, childish-looking websites, and you probably never went to go see them again because of how unprofessional they look. Mobile apps are exactly the same way. If you downloaded a very crude-looking app, more than likely you're probably never going to use it and probably delete it right away. The more sophisticated mobile apps have gone through much time in research and UX design to make sure that it's usable, it's friendly, it's simple, it's intuitive, and there are many firms out there that provide those capabilities, some better than others, of course. But we partner with a pretty strong firm that's actually local here to South Florida, and we outsource the design to them, and they outsource the software engineering effort over to us. But that's essentially the crux of the development of the mobile apps. Now, after you develop your app, the next question is, well, how do you get it into the App Store? The process of submission to the App Store is relatively straightforward, depending on which App Store you go through. With Apple, they have a very stringent process. They actually test out your app, so you have to provide them with information on how to test it, how to use it. If it has a login screen, they need you to provide them with access so that they can log in and play around with the app. And you have to make, if anything is wrong with your app, like if it crashes or if it doesn't return results or whatever, your app will be immediately rejected. And, typically when you submit an app for the first time to Apple, it usually takes about a week before they begin testing. And once they start testing the app, you usually get a response back within 24 to 48 hours. Once you get that response back, if it's positive, usually within a day or two, it's available in the App Store. If it's not, they reject it, and they give you a reason of why they rejected it, and then you have to repeat the whole process again. So sometimes it's metadata that you forgot. Sometimes you didn't, put in the right encryption keys. Sometimes you didn't submit the correct screens and the right resolutions. There's a whole plethora of different things that you have to do, and sometimes it literally takes weeks and weeks and weeks of going back and forth between yourself and Apple in order to ensure that your app actually gets into the App Store. But you can't circumnavigate that process, and you can't speed up the process either. You have to make sure that you submit the app with all of its needs, at the very, very beginning. And otherwise the whole process just drags out for weeks or months. With Google and Windows, it's a little bit easier because on the Android store, it's actually quite automated. As long as you provide all the information, they actually do an automated test of your app. A human doesn't actually review every single screen to make sure it works. They have a pretty sophisticated system that automates that whole process. With Windows, it's a little bit of both. They go through a process that's partly human and partly system. So that's essentially the crux of the process of doing it. And of course, at AAJ we submit apps all the time on behalf of our clients. So we can help in terms of making sure that when you submit it, it's going to get approved the very first time and very quickly. So that's essentially the conclusion of the 5 basic things that you need to know. regarding building mobile apps. And like I said, here at AAJ, this is what we do, among many of the other things, but we specialize in mobile app development, especially when it's enterprise mobile apps. And when I say enterprise, I mean it's for use in the enterprise. It connects with back-end systems. There's authentication with your own Active Directory system. It transfers information back and forth between the app and the enterprise system or systems that are either in the cloud or on your prem or a combination of both. And you can remotely access the device. You can remotely remove the app. So it's very nice as you onboard and offboard employees within your organization. So that concludes the webinar, and I'd like to pass it off for you guys to, if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to address them at this point.
Thank you very much, Alex. A few questions have come in. The first one, Alex, is how long does it take to develop a mobile app?
Okay, that's an excellent question. The length of time that it takes to create a mobile app is somewhat nebulous, depending on what the requirements of the app are. The typical rule of thumb that I go by is that for every screen that you have on your mobile app, especially if there's a back-end system that it needs to connect with, is somewhere between 2 weeks or so to complete. And the 2-week estimate that I come up with is due to the back-end systems that need to be connected, a REST API that may need to be developed that doesn't exist, and the UX design that goes with developing the screen, the interface to it, the way it looks, the fonts, the colors, all the other things that go with the UI aspect of it. So if your app has, say, 5 or 6 different screens, assuming each one is relatively different, let's say it's got 6 screens multiplied by 2 weeks, so that's how long it takes approximately to develop the app. If you have essentially one person doing the mobile app and you have one person doing the back end to support that mobile app. Those are guidelines. They're not exact, and certainly you can't use that for every single app out there. But if you use that general guideline, that kind of tells you what to expect if it's a straightforward app. Now, if you have a very complex back-end system, if you have very complex web pages, if there's a lot of complexity to the screens in the mobile app, then that estimate is nowhere near what it will take. I mean, it could take months to develop a particular screen, especially if it's got GPS stuff and maps and things are moving and there's interactivity going on. Then we're talking about a lot more complicated stuff, and it usually takes a lot longer than a few weeks. It could be a few months per screen. But for enterprise types apps, that's usually how long it takes. If it's not an enterprise app, and if it's something that doesn't really connect to a back end, it's more like a game or something that doesn't really communicate with anything, then it's a lot simpler because there's a whole back end system that you don't have to deal with, and usually the estimates are far shorter. But that's approximately how long it takes.
Okay, thank you. And we had another question come in that what benefits does a native app have over RWD other than the camera function or push notification?
Sure. So I'll give you an example, actually, of such a question of what can you do with a native app that you can't really do with a rapidly developed app. So here's an example of an app that I developed. Let me log in. So let me remove the screen so you can't see what my credentials are, and then I'll be right back with the screen. Hold on one second. Okay, here we go. All right, so I've logged into this app, and here I am scrolling down the app, as you can see. And what this is doing in real time is, as I'm scrolling, the image that appears that you see is called in the background, lazy loading, if you will, which is very, very difficult to do in Xamarin. And I've tried doing this in Xamarin for several weeks, and it's just very, very difficult to do this. And it literally took me a couple of days to do this using native code. So here's an example of what you can do with native that is extremely complex to do, if not impossible to do with Xamarin. Here's another example, the 3 lines that appear in the upper left corner. I'm going to press those 3 lines and watch what happens as I move the menu over. And as you can see, the menu moves over and it fades in, and if I move it out, it fades out. This kind of thing is not capable yet to be done in Xamarin today. I'm sure that in the next few months, Xamarin will come up with some APIs that will allow the platform to be able to provide this kind of capability. But today it is not. So something like that you have to do with native code, whether it's Android or Windows or iOS. But you cannot do this in Xamarin just yet. So there you go. Those are some examples.
Okay, and then we had another question that came in, which looks like a 2-parter. How does outsourcing of a mobile app actually happen, and then what is the typical process?
That's a good question. In fact, we spoke with a client a couple days ago, and they wanted to develop a mobile app. They currently don't have one. They have a website that is used internally at the company, but they want to expose that website and its capabilities through a mobile app to the outside world. So in that regard, they actually have a software development team that is working there in their offices, here in the United States. But they want to achieve 2 goals. One is to develop the app with an offshore model, so it's a little bit cheaper to develop. But they also want to take ownership of the app once they're done with it and enhance it internally. So what we have proposed to them, and they've already accepted and we've begun working, is that we do what's called a hybrid mode. We have an on-site senior developer that is working side by side with their developers and teaching them on how to develop a mobile app, what are the best practices, what are the things, how do you structure it, how do you provide the menu and system, and so on. And then we have several offshore folks that are working diligently in India that are developing the back-end code as well as the other versions of the code for the other mobile platforms. So the on-site guy is doing pure iOS development, whereas the offshore guys are doing Android and Windows, as well as doing the back-end API layer to sit on top of the customer's database and application layer to expose that content through a REST interface. So the onshore guy is coordinating everything between the front end and the back end. So there's a bit of project management going on there. But the work is shared between on-site and offshore, and this results in a pretty solid delivery model for the client. The client gets to see the code being developed right in front of their eyes. The existing team is learning how to develop the code so that they can take ownership of it after, and they're getting the benefit of seeing the other versions of the app not being developed on-site, but they see the code because we check in the code every single day into our shared repository, so they get to see as the code is being developed. So that's kind of the process that this particular client wanted. Some of our clients want the entire process to be completely outsourced, and they want the cheapest solution possible, so we do pretty much the entire thing outside of project management and architecture. We do that offshore. Some customers want it all on-site so they can learn from the process and take ownership of it. And some people want to have a mixed bag and have a hybrid approach. So it depends on the client, but that's kind of the process that we go through.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question was, what is the cost of developing a mobile app?
Yeah. The cost of developing a mobile app, it's a very loaded question, similar to what does it take to make a website. And if you ask CNN, the cost is several $1,000,000. And if you ask others, it's even more, and others are a lot less. And so the cost of developing an app is challenging to predict, primarily because of the complexity or lack thereof that's involved. How many platforms do you want to build it to? How many different versions of the platform? Like, for example, with iOS, you have the iPhone 6, you have the iPhone 6 Plus, you have the iPad 2, the iPad mini. So you have all those different platforms, and unfortunately, all of them have, not all, but most have different resolutions from one another. And also you have the portrait versus landscape. So, as you rotate the phone, in landscape mode, how is the app going to be presented? So there's a lot of effort involved in doing that, and all that effort obviously costs more and more time as you want to provide solutions for every platform out there. At AAJ, we provide some very compelling price points for both on-site as well as offshore. And we actually also have 2 offshore centers, one in South America for those folks that want to have near-shore development done in a relatively same time zone. And we also have a development center in Asia for those folks who are more price sensitive and don't really have the need to talk with the developers on a daily basis. So there's some benefits there. But as far as price, it really depends on how many screens. It depends on what the back-end system look like, how you're going to interact between the two. But it's not cheap. It depends, and one could say that if you've got, as a general ballpark figure, if you're developing for a couple of platforms and with some multiple resolutions, and you have a fairly stable back end, but you need to have a mobile app that you currently don't have, a good ballpark figure is around $50,000. And again, that's a very, very big ballpark figure. It could be a lot higher, it could be less. So it really depends. But it's not something that takes a week or 2 weeks in one person's time. I don't know why people think that developing an app is something that happens in a matter of days or hours. It's a myth, and I wish it could be that easy, but at some point I guess it will be, but not today.
All right, thank you very much, Alex. And just a quick reminder that our next mobility webinar, titled Creating Mobile Apps That Transform Business, is on Tuesday, April 7th at the same time, 1:30 Eastern, and it will feature Ken Parmalee. He's the National Director for Product Strategy at IBM Mobile First. And also a reminder that this webinar will be available within 24 hours at aajtech.com. Thank you very much for attending, and have a great rest of your day.